For our purposes, roads are publicly funded blank spaces within cities that are used for moving people and things around. Here I'm trying to cross Fullerton Street at the crosswalk on a typical day in Chicago. According to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the number of people killed in our nation's highways is roughly the same as the population of Northbrook, Illinois, around 30,000. Getting killed by a motor vehicle is in fact one of the most common ways to die in the United States. Pedestrians account for 14% of those deaths. Although it's the law that cars have to stop for pedestrians on the crosswalk in Illinois, I find it safer, faster, and easier to jaywalk. The statistics on this are in my favor, as the majority of pedestrian fatalities occur at the crosswalk or in other sanctioned pedestrian spaces. The idea that roads are inherently dangerous is new to human culture, less than 100 years old. To be more specific, roads have always been understood to be a public good, something accessible and maintained by everybody. But for the past 80 years, the road has been the exclusive domain of cars, trucks, and motorcycles. Though I still pay for it with my taxes, my access to the street only goes as far as my access to a vehicle. Roads, then, are public spaces for private automotive interests. Let's go back in time to the early days of Chicago, when the streets were made mostly of mud and horse manure. In those days, the street worked more like a school hallway than the organized thoroughfare we now know. You could do just about whatever you wanted in the street as long as you weren't getting in anybody else's way. More important streets were paved with cobblestones, a road technology as old as Rome and still used in many parts of the world. These streets are made by finding smooth rocks and embedding them in dirt, making a surface that's resistant to erosion and slightly less muddy than nothing, but by no means smooth. Cobblestones are also durable and allow for both grip and moisture runoff. For many years, cities considered them a luxury. Then, in the late 1800s, bicycles and cyclists came along and ruined the streets for everybody, setting events in motion that would end the road's station as a public space, dooming themselves in the process. Though the design for a practical air-filled tire that could lessen the turbulence of a cobblestone road was patented in 1887, many cyclists of the time were still riding on solid rubber glued to steel rims. Back then, bicycles were often referred to as the bone shakers because riding across a cobbled street on a narrow saddle felt like straddling a jackhammer. Enter the League of American Wheelmen, Chicago's oldest bicycle club, who joined forces with farmers and carriage companies to lobby for and win finely paved roads throughout the United States, but especially in our cities. I woke up to the sounds of construction. My street is a well-known runway for the local motorists who use it for high-speed record attempts. Unfortunately, the intersection with Western Avenue forces them to slow down, so they sent out a road crew to build this launch ramp. Now, the drivers can fly over Western without losing any speed. This would not have been possible with the dirt and cobblestones of the past. Shortly after the turn of the century, cars were new and mainly owned by the city's wealthy elite. Previous incarnations of the automobile were slow, expensive, unreliable, and therefore didn't affect the street and the street culture significantly. But by the mid-20s, engineers had worked out many of the car's growing pains, making them a viable transportation option for a large section of the American population. Thanks to those meddling, pedaling bicycles, the roads were also much faster, smoother, and easier to use. Where once the streets and everything in them flowed like a lazy river, now powerful machines could slash through the currents, disrupting everything in their path. This disruptor is known in auto circles as Mr. Saturday Night. It's understood that if you own this car, you'll need its impressive top speed to get away from the mobs of women fighting to ride in that shotgun seat. This 1978 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am is equipped with a removable T-top roof, 3-speed automatic transmission, and a 400 cubic inch big block V8 engine, made in the motor mecca of Detroit, Michigan. Although it looks sleek and powerful, it's an anachronism. The modern Honda Accord can beat it in every imaginable competition. It has more space, gets better mileage, and in a quarter-mile drag race, Mr. Saturday Night will come across the line in 15 seconds, while Miss Accord will do it 2 seconds faster. This unexpected performance gap is the result of decades of labor by some of the world's brightest engineers. In the 1920s and earlier, cars were considered a nuisance by everyone in the cities, except the elite few who owned cars, the manufacturers who built cars, and the dealers who sold cars. These interests formed a cohesive group known as Motordom. Motordom's primary objective was to redefine the very nature of the streets, to alter thousands of years of public conditioning of what the streets are and who they're for. And, with a clever marketing campaign, they succeeded. Within a little over a decade, Motordom convinced lawmakers, shopkeepers, mothers, policemen, and the public at large that the streets belonged to automobiles, and everything else was an interloper. The brilliance and magnitude of this achievement cannot be understated. In 1924, the New York Times ran an article saying, "The horrors of peace appear to be more appalling than the horrors of war. The automobile looms up as a far more destructive mechanism than the machine gun. The reckless motorist deals more death than the artilleryman. The man in the streets seems less safe than the man in the trench. The greatest single lethal factor is the automobile. It left shambles in its wake as it coursed through 1923. But by 1930, a 180 of public opinion occurred, and the act of jaywalking, that is, walking out in the street at any time or place other than the approved crosswalk, became illegal in many cities. A decade before, walking in the street would have been the polite thing to do in many cases, as it freed up the cleaner elevated sidewalks for other people. The term jaywalker has an interesting history too. Originally, it referred to any dumb country boy bumbling around the city, looking at the sights instead of watching where he was going. Motordom adapted and popularized the term to refer to people who walked out into the streets in front of cars. They hired Boy Scouts to hand out tickets to people caught jaywalking, and those tickets explained what the term meant and why jaywalking was bad. This, along with a newspaper media blitz and political pressure, was how Motordom convinced the nation that they should modernize, get a car, and free up the streets for progress. Ironically, freeing up the streets for progress also means blocking them with vehicles. This is what killed the public streetcar. When a streetcar blocks an automobile, the driver can turn and find a new route. But when an automobile blocks a streetcar, it has no choice but to wait. In this paradigm, you're better off walking, which is how I feel about the Chicago bus system whenever I'm using it. We sit, waiting for a break in traffic so the dumb machine can go another 200 feet to the next bus stop, where we'll wait for another break in traffic to get to the next bus stop, where we'll wait for another break in traffic to get to the next bus stop, where we'll wait for another break in traffic to get to the next. The alternative to the bus, if you don't want to walk and you can't drive, that is to ride your bike. I'll admit I'm a bit partial to cycling because I work in a bike shop. Cycling is fast, cheap, gets you in the open air, makes you feel fit and strong, strengthens your marriage, promotes world peace, and makes you a more empathetic citizen. These are the advantages I subtly tried to explain to this gentleman, who tried to kill me. The story behind our altercation is that I was riding my bike in the bike lane and got forced out when a taxi swerved in front of me to pick up a fare. Then I got stuck on the opposite side of a car, and all the traffic behind me had to slow so that I could get back to the bike lane. This man was a few cars back and saw the whole event, so he rolled up to me and said if I had been in front of him, he would have run me over. Then, to prove his point, he did try to run me over. This final shot is from when the man parked in the bike lane, got out of his SUV, and tried to punch me off my bike. I bring this up to show the enduring effects of Motordom's marketing and the thesis of the anti-jaywalking movement. Central to their campaign was the concept of shifting responsibility. It isn't the driver's sole job to be ever vigilant, it's everybody else's job to stay out of the way. This is reflected by the statistics kept by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, who report that almost 75% of pedestrian fatalities occurred because of the victim's negligence. To be more specific, they claim that most pedestrians were killed for darting into the road, being under the influence of drugs or alcohol, standing, lying, working, or playing in the road, crossing outside of an approved crosswalk, and most commonly, not wearing bright enough clothing. That's right, a driver going 65 miles an hour in a 3,000-pound vehicle can be exonerated for killing a person on foot by using the defense, "I just didn't see him." This was the defense used in the killing of a cyclist in front of a bike shop I used to work for. Neil Townsend was biking to a meeting when he swerved to avoid the suddenly opened door of a Nissan Altima and fell under the wheels of a tractor trailer. Neil Townsend was an avid cyclist and advocate who worked for a company that designs high-visibility bicycle safety equipment. I do, of course, understand that people who drive cars are very important. Therefore, whenever possible, if I'm on my bike, I like to get out of the way of the faster traffic behind me, using the sidewalk whenever it's open. But what are you supposed to do when the sidewalk isn't clear? What does it say about a society's values when a road like this one, a road used exclusively by private motorists and commercial vehicles, is completely clear of debris while the sidewalk is covered by 6 inches of uneven snow and ice? Are people to walk in the street? But what if they aren't visible? Bicycles represent 22% of road users on this stretch of Milwaukee Avenue, which is why they've been given such a well-painted bike lane. Nonetheless, motor vehicle drivers sometimes mistake the meaning of those solid painted lines, confusing them for a parking zone. Mark Twain once said, "Get a bicycle. You won't regret it as long as you live." Things are changing, cities are getting denser, new people are moving in, and new ideas are taking shape. Since about 2008, when the American auto industry almost collapsed, there's been a profound shift in how we see cars. Young people who graduated college or high school around the time of the economic downturn are flocking to the cities. Many of them can't afford a car, myself included. Baby boomers are also moving into denser areas with the goal of avoiding the need for a car. This push for density is making us rethink what streets are for. For instance, most cars spend the majority of their lives parked, taking up space, and as space becomes more valuable, we might not be able to devote hundreds of miles of road on parking when the paved space could be used for bike lanes, jogging paths, street vendors, or extended lawns. For nearly 100 years, streets have been commandeered by the private interests of the automotive industry. But now, in a new climate of change spurred on by the need for more livable cities, our streets may soon find their purpose in flux again. Let me leave you with a glimpse into what may be the future. This is Argyle Street. Within the next few years, city planners will remove the curbs, remove the lanes, minimize the amount of signs, and lower the speed limit to 15 miles an hour. This new street design is actually the oldest form of street, just an open layout engineered for the freest possible exchange of human bodies from one place to the next. Cars, bikes, and pedestrians will all intermingle, trusting their safety to one another on the premise of mutual respect for each other's right to live. If it's a success, we might find more of these open road plans elsewhere in Chicago, and maybe in other cities too. If this happens, the minority rule of the car in our urban landscape may end, ushering in a new age of the city, or a return to a time when the publicly owned spaces truly were public.